this newspaper might have said, 2 sentences about it. And all in all, when, all of that research kind of combined, I ended up getting just about every, fact that was sent out to the media that you could print. And then later on, when we were at Game Informer magazine, they had a room where they were just kind of throwing everything they were sent. And so we were, helping them go through that and digitizing it for 5 weeks. In doing that, we found the actual press kit from Life Fitness that they had sent out to the magazines. Yeah, I'm like, if I had just had this, I wouldn't have had to piece all of that together. I would have just been like, okay, this is everything they wanted you to know about this.
It's like if Eternal Life was like a cake recipe, and you would piece together all the ingredients from everything else, and then you finally get the real recipe.
Yeah, like I figured out the eggs, I did figure out the flour and everything, but man, it would have been so much easier if you had just given me this in the first place.
If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment about the episode. And if you're watching on Spotify or listening on a traditional podcast platform, please follow, rate us 5 stars, and leave a review if you would be so kind. Thank you. Welcome to the Way to Know You podcast, Season 2, Episode 33. My name is Nick Rounds, and I will be your host. My next guest is a professional historian, preservationist, and retailer of video games. She's a co-director of the Video Game History Foundation, based out of Emeryville, California, as well as the co-owner of Pink Gorilla, a retro video game retailer based out of Seattle, Washington. Additionally, she's a co-host of the Video Game History Hour podcast, where they deep dive on games and consoles. When she's not busy dusting off her prize WonderSwan collection, she's restoring game cartridges and keeping customers safe from bootlegs. More on that later. Kelsey Lewin, wait, I know you. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's a heck of an intro. Sometimes I forget how many things I do until someone starts talking, until someone starts introducing me on a podcast or something. I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of things.
I'm very busy, and you are very busy. Yeah, I mean, you're more or less your full-time job, no matter where you are, is devotion to video games, whether it's selling them, preserving them, or anything else. It's all things video games, which I think you've done the right thing in centering your passion, your professional life, and your passions around video games. So actually, let's start there. Let's start where the trouble begins. I always like to start with like how you became a nerd. Like, what is your nerd intro story? So talk to me about like, what are the things that basically turn you into a video game geek?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely didn't think that I was going to have a career in the video game space, mostly because it took me until I was probably like 18 years old to realize that is a career, that like people actually work in this industry and it doesn't just materialize on shelves in front of you. But yeah, I mean, I was someone who played games my whole life. I started with my dad's original Game Boy when I was like 3 or 4 years old, playing Super Mario Land and Tetris and baseball on it. And Pokemon was kind of the first big game to really sink its teeth into me and make me be like, okay, yes, this is a thing I like. This is a thing I'm going to always like. I'm here for this. But I wasn't one of those kids that like had every gaming magazine and was like super up to date on all the news. I had, I was always playing a game, but wasn't really until I was in college and started getting more involved in like the retro gaming scene and the game collecting scene that it started to be like a, eat, sleep, and breathe video games kind of deal.
Yeah, because you moved to Seattle in 2012, right? And shortly thereafter, you got a job at Pink Gorilla, formerly known as Pink Godzilla, which is a retro video game store. There's a lot of retro video game stores in the Seattle area, which is amazing. But I think Pink Gorilla, especially now these days, is probably one of the most famous ones in the area. I guess, so I'm natively from the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where Emeryville is from, which is why I said Emeryville, not Oakland, because I know what the difference is. But
yeah, that was good. I was like, oh, you know exactly where we are. Okay.
I do. Yes. I'm very familiar with Eville and all the things associated. Yes, exactly. And Rudy's Can't Fail Cafe, which sadly
No,
closed down.
it closed. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, you
closed.
knew that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Sadly closed down. Had many a breakfast there, and then just drove past the Pixar lamp all the time. But yeah, um, sorry, I lost my train of that. Oh, about retro gaming scene. So, uh, you're a Seattle transplant as of 2012. I'm a Seattle transplant as of 2016. And one of the things that kind of like really took me aback. So I'm in the video games industry myself. I'm a game designer, and one of the things that kind of took me aback is like how saturated the retro video game scene was in Seattle. But then you think about the fact that Microsoft is here, Nintendo of America is here, and much other gaming companies, you realize, oh wow, there is a lot of saturation of games here, and thus gaming consoles and stuff like that. From your perspective, as somebody who moved here in 2012, started working at a retro video game store, then also for the past decade has been very much involved in the retro gaming scene, and now the historical cataloging of it. What is your take on the scene, and even from like when you kind of started here back in 2012 to like now? Like, what are some of the trends or interesting things about this particular area that kind of really sticks with you?
Yeah, Seattle's definitely a really big area for this, and it kind of always has been. The biggest retro game convention it's in Portland, not in Seattle, but Pacific Northwest based. It's just it's a really large kind of I don't know, like a mecca of retro game stuff.
Right.
And yeah, I think that does have to do at least partially with the amount of kind of tech and game industry that this area has. But it's grown a lot even just since 2012. I mean, there have always been a decent amount of video game stores in this area, but certainly the idea of game collecting has kind of ballooned. I would say probably starting around 2016 was when it really started kind of um, noticeably taking off, and then obviously over the pandemic kind of got its really big boost in interest. So that's kind of happening everywhere, but obviously in a highly concentrated area like Seattle. Yeah, from about when you moved here to now is really when it's started to take off and become uh, a big pastime, I think. And to be clear, a lot of our customers at Pink Gorilla, the vast majority of our customers even are not necessarily collectors. I mean, we do sell retro games, we do sell very rare games, but there are more people who are coming in to find a PS4 game to play, or maybe rebuying a PlayStation 1 or a Super Nintendo or something to kind of relive their childhood a little bit, but not necessarily diving all the way into this as a hobby, more just as a way of kind of reconnecting with stuff that they used to love. So it's a good mix up here. Everyone's kind of video games are very accepted up here. That's true around the world, I think, more so now than ever. But yeah, especially up here is very like you can still totally be like a frat guy or a jock or something, and still be into retro games, and no one will think it's weird.
Dude, bro, these ice climbers would be so cool.
I mean, you'd be surprised. Like, I would say a ton of our, we have one location that's right by the University of Washington, which is a big university here in the States, and yeah, a ton of our customers are college kids just kind of reclaiming stuff that they grew up with. They're also buying modern stuff, but so you asked about trends. I mean, that's now that I've been doing this for a decade, it's pretty clear that once people hit their like early 20s, maybe even late teens, it seems like that's when the combination of nostalgia / I finally have some disposable income now kind of meets this nice apex, and you get people kind of um, just trying to reclaim some of the past stuff they enjoyed. So when I first started, that was more like Nintendo 64. It has graduated to GameCube and even Wii a little bit now. I know it's weird to think of the Wii as retro, but that's where we're at now. Is that the Wii was a long time ago, folks. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that is absolutely a trend, and particularly with Nintendo consoles, but it is across the board too. I mean, PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 and, Xbox and Xbox 360 have been climbing in popularity as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up on 20 years. I started in the games industry in 2006 when it was a transition between PS2 and PS3, PSP, Xbox 360, like all that stuff was kind of on that cusp around 2006. And it's funny to kind of come full circle towards everything that I was working on when I first started out my career is now very much retro. And it's basically people that were my little cousin's age who I was buying like SingStar or Guitar Hero for when he was growing up, or new Call of Duty 4. Like I worked on Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and I remember playing that in alpha and being like, this is going to change everything because it's in 60 FPS and people are going to lose their minds. And now it's just like, that's just kind of like the status quo of what Call of Duty has been for like the past 20 years.
Yeah.
But I digress. One of the things that I find most interesting about Pink Gorilla is like I'd actually never seen a Super Famicom game in person before, which sounds kind of strange, but I guess maybe that might be strange for you to hear, but
no, I had never seen one in person until I moved to Seattle. So not strange at all. I'm sorry, go ahead. Continue your question there.
No. I had never seen one in person before. I think the first place I'd actually seen it was in Suica, up on Capitol Hill. They had a really funny collection of Famicom games, which I'm guessing they had gotten from Pink Gorilla, but I'd never seen a Famicom game in person. And in addition to like just having like games that you kind of claim from your childhood, I think it's just really interesting and really cool just to see games that you would normally never be exposed to just be out at Pink Gorilla, which I think is actually really exciting to be like, hey, did you know about this? And a plug for your YouTube channel, which you're not really active on per se, but there's some really great deep dives, is that you've highlighted a lot of really cool and interesting niche, like kind of shovelware and or things that kind of like happened that existed. You're like, how the hell did this happen? How does it exist? Like Glucose Boy and other like edutainment stuff, which I think is really fascinating. So highly recommend anybody who's listening to this definitely check Kelsey's channel out about that, because it's actually really interesting. Also the Game History Org podcast as well. Really great deep dives on that kind of stuff, because I think you're a really good researcher and I really enjoy the content that you put out. So
thank you. I wish I had time to do more of that. But I mean, just to comment on the Japanese stuff, especially, that's something I am I'm particularly passionate about at Pink Gorilla, and I think something that sets us apart a little bit is, I want people to be exposed to some stuff that they might not be aware of already. There's a lot of really great Famicom exclusives, things that only came out in Japan for various systems, many of which you don't need, any knowledge of the language to play. But not only that, I mean, I think especially as prices and interest and stuff in retro gaming kind of continues to rise, the Japanese games can be a really good budget option in a lot of cases, particularly on systems like the Game Boy. Japanese Tetris is the exact same game as US Tetris. There's not a line of Japanese text in that game. That's just one example, but there's a ton of games where there is functionally no difference, or sometimes literally no difference between the two regions, and you do get a pretty significant price difference as well. So you can, if you're like, oh, I really want to play Kirby, but man, that game is like $25 on the Game Boy now, and that seems like a lot, but it's $10 for a Japanese copy or whatever. Those numbers are sort of correct. I don't know. I don't know if I could tell you with utmost confidence that those are the exact things we charge for it, but the point stands is I think it's good to kind of expose people to that, to other regions and other areas of gaming that they might not otherwise get a chance to. And then that's reflected in our merchandise as well too. So we carry a lot of like import Japanese plush and keychains and stuff like that. So it's kind of a unique experience for like gift shopping and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. When I first started out, I was a localization tester for The Sims, and I was playing The Sims in like Portuguese or um, simplified Chinese, stuff like that. And I got
Do
really
they
good.
change the Simlish in other languages?
Nope, the Simlish is exactly the
Okay.
same
All
in
right. I
other
was just
language.
curious.
It's just the text prompts. Like the German, obviously, was the one that was always the most ridiculous because it's like
Hmm.
blah, 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 spiel at the very end. But yeah, no, the Simlish is universal. But yeah, I just got beaten on flashbacks of testing the Sims and playing it all day, every day in a different language. Yeah, it's possible, but it's funny because like I would expect the Japanese versions to be more expensive, but go figure. What are you going to do?
Yeah, there's just, I mean, there is the occasional exception to this rule, but by and large, there's just not really the same. Not that there are no retro game collectors in Japan, there absolutely are. There's a thriving scene, but it is nowhere near the size or intensity that we have here in the States and also in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And Japan's a country that doesn't have a whole lot of real estate. So having a collection like the one you see behind me here is a lot more difficult to do in a. I mean, I'm in Seattle; it's not that much better. Let's be real, but um, it's more difficult to do that in like Tokyo than it is to do in many places in the States. So
Right. The apartment in Tokyo is similar to an apartment in like, Manhattan, where it's like enjoy your broom closet and your
yeah,
300 square feet of bed and bathroom and maybe like a kitchen if you're lucky. But
yeah,
yeah, I totally
exactly.
get that. One thing you mentioned earlier, which I think is really interesting, is people getting some disposable income in their 20s and kind of chasing after their childhood, like the mom gave them away generation, where it's like whether it be a toy or a video game or something, there was something you had in your childhood that meant a lot to you that is suddenly gone. And you mentioned some of the trends of like GameCube and Wii and everything else. Is that kind of still what's really hot right now, per se, for that nostalgia generation? Is there anything else that seems to be catching on, which is kind of interesting?
It's all that same generation. I mean, it's GameCube. If you have been paying attention to like pricing trends at all, which I mean, I don't expect anyone to be unless they're either in this hobby or just super curious. But GameCube games on the whole are more expensive than they've ever been. The GameCube, for as popular as it is, especially now, one of Nintendo's worst selling consoles of all time. I mean, literally only the Virtual Boy and the Wii U performed worse. It was soundly beaten in that generation by Sony and Microsoft. Um, and so really like supply is just not there in the same quantities as it is for a lot of the other Nintendo systems. And so obviously that drives the prices up. There's huge demand for it right now. And then yeah, like Game Boy Advance, which is really the same, same generation, just handheld, is kind of seeing that same renaissance right now, where it's just um, prices are going up due to demand. And then also, I mean, something I think people don't consider with handheld stuff is it's really easy to lose a Game Boy game, or a DS game or a Game Boy Advance game. That's something that can fall between the cushions somewhere, fall behind a drawer somewhere, and just completely disappear. So, in greater quantities than I think really any other video game to this point, I think a lot of the copies that exist out there are just simply being lost or accidentally tossed. Um, so, I mean, again, everything is supply and demand. But yeah, I would say GameCube and Game Boy Advance are probably on the steepest incline right now. I suspect that Wii is Wii and DS are kind of on their way right next to it. DS is already on its way up. Um, Thankfully for both of those systems, those are some of Nintendo's best-selling consoles. So supply is going to be there in much greater quantities than the GameCube. But yeah, that's where I'm seeing it going right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I remember I passed on the GameCube, but I had a lot of friends that had it. Played a lot of Double Dash, and I actually replayed, or I purposely sought out Eternal Darkness because I never played it before. My friend Aaron, who made the game Nevermind, recommended it to me. It was kind of like the inspiration behind Nevermind. So I was like, all right, I got to go play this now. And then Resident Evil 4. That was really the main thing that like I had FOMO about GameCube about, because up until only a couple years after that, like Resident Evil 4 was basically not out on anything else except for GameCube for a hot minute. But yeah, I definitely had some FOMO about that for sure. In working at Pink Gorilla, initially as an employee and then later as an owner, you've had a lot of interactions with customers shopping in your store. What have been some of the most rewarding or fulfilling interactions that you've had with customers that have visited Pink Gorilla?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I am really excited anytime I get to reconnect someone with, a piece of their childhood, or sort of like a missing piece where they're like, I had a system. I can't remember what system it was. I think it was purple. I played a game that was kind of like this, and just kind of getting to do the mystery solving with people, and then that sort of reward is enormous. We are coming into my favorite time of year, which is when the holiday shopping starts, because we tend to get a lot of parents and friends and stuff who are coming in, and they're maybe a little bit less educated on what they're looking for, and just being able to kind of help steer them. Like, if you come up to me and you're like, I have a 9-year-old, I know they like, Roblox or whatever, what should I get them? And being able to just kind of solve that mystery with them, and get them hooked up with a Switch, and with a Lego game, and a Mario game or something like that. Like, it's that is a really, really fun part of the job for me. I'm trying to think if there's any like really specific one. Todd Fry once came into the store to make fun of his own game, which was really unexpected and fun. He did the Atari 2600 version of Pac-Man, which is kind of infamously, not a super great port, but one of the best-selling Atari games of all time. Maybe the best-selling Atari game. It was, it was enormous,
Right.
huge
Pac-Man
success.
Fever.
Yeah, made that guy a millionaire. But sort of an infamously not great port of it. So him coming in one time and like pointing at his own game on the wall, and laughing at it, and saying that thing sucked, was was a fun one for me. I mean, I love when we have developers come in of any kind, and to be able to see especially older developers who are often a mix of excited and confused to see like the Genesis game they worked on or whatever on the wall, and it's still worth like $25 or whatever, and they're like, really? Why? So those are always really fun too. I don't know, I've been doing this for a decade now, and it really, I mean, it's easier for me to say this now because I don't do it full time anymore. The Video Game History Foundation is my full time job, and then
Right.
I am a part time owner who doesn't have to put in 50 hours a week in the store anymore. But it still never gets old. Like, it's always a new thing every day, and I've had a lot of really rewarding interactions with people over the years, even if it's just, figuring out a game together, or bonding over like, oh, I loved this game, or recommending things to people, or getting things recommended to me. I mean, it's all really fun.
Speaking of the store, so between the time that I contacted you and the time of this recording, there was a news story that happened over your international district store, that it had been robbed and vandalized. As a small business owner that very much cares about their employees and their safety, what kind of conversations have you kind of had around just keeping your business safe and keep your employees safe? And I'd imagine that has to be like a really scary experience going through that.
Yeah.
For all parties involved.
Yeah, it definitely has been. I mean, we've been in that spot in the International District for almost 17 years now. And it has, it's kind of, every area has its ups and downs, I think, in terms of how, I don't know, how well managed it is. But yeah, absolutely. Like, I love the International District. I have I've loved that store for so long, and so it's very frustrating to kind of have a string of incidents kind of all one right after another, when they had really never happened before. I mean, as a business owner, petty theft every once in a while is expected, but the more extreme stuff is not. And so we've had to, we've had to beef up security there, which is one of those things you're like, it has to be done, but doesn't feel great doing it. And just really try to make everyone feel as safe as possible in that location. So we've made a lot of security improvements to our unit, and still kind of ongoing conversations about what the future of that place is. I think our specific location there is very good for visibility, but it also has it's a like a unit inside of a building, but with a lot of outside facing windows. So there's basically, I mean, the issue is that there's a lot of ways to get in.
Right.
And so it's not particularly secure in the same way that like our other location is, where it's just a single entrance, and you only have to really worry about securing one area. So it's been a learning experience. We have added a lot of things to that location, and I mean to both locations too, just for good measure, to kind of make it a little bit more secure. I'm very happy to see that there are it seems like there are going to be some changes in that area. The International District, I feel like I said, I absolutely love that area. It's been incredible. And then just over basically since the pandemic, I will insert zero politics into this, but it has really just kind of been forgotten or neglected as an area, and really suffered for it. So seems like things are probably on the upswing, which is great news. I don't have anything to like report about about that location right now, but it was a learning experience. It was not an experience I wish on any business owner, but one that, if you're around for 17 years, I feel like at some point, you're going to have the incident that makes you rethink some things and add some things. So we've had it now.
And you recently announced that you're going to do the Capitol Hill store as well, opening. Is that just kind of like a fallback of let's open something new and see how it goes?
Yeah, it's a lot of reasons. We've always wanted to be in the internet or in the Capitol Hill area, because it's just, I mean, it's such a good fit for our kind of store. It is absolutely the right kind of vibe for a video game store, an import store. It's if anyone who's listening who's not super familiar with Seattle, it's the trendy part of town. It's the sort of like, it's young, and there's a lot of really good restaurants and trendy bookstore and that sort of thing. So we're excited to be among that. There used to be a GameStop in Capitol Hill. There are no longer any GameStops in all of Seattle proper, which is wild. There's not a single GameStop in Seattle. There's, I think there's still one in White Center or Burien or something like that. But that's a 25-minute drive from Seattle.
I purposely camped out for my NES Mini at that GameStop that was in Seattle on purpose, and that's the only place where I got it.
Yeah. So I definitely, now's kind of the time for there to be another Seattle Pink Gorilla. Now that there's no GameStop not that we are in any way, shape, or form a GameStop, but we do, we'll carry all the popular latest releases, and we do carry modern games as well. So if you're looking for PS4 games and Xbox Series X and Xbox One games and all of that good stuff, Switch games, like we will carry those just like a GameStop will, and with better prices. So I mean, it's a lot of reasons to open that. The International District store is a frustratingly small location. We are kind of always in this ebb and flow of inventory management there. And I don't even mean like the trade-ins there are fine. The actual, the amount of Xbox games or whatever that we have there is often totally fine. But it's things like keeping enough GameCube controllers or cords or something in stock, because we don't really have a back room there. We don't really have a lot of space for storage. So, we're kind of constantly refilling that place. So that's not something that this will fix by any means, but it will. It's a large enough location. It's more along the lines of our larger university district store that we can kind of have shipments sent to both and kind of strengthen. Two big stores will strengthen the one smaller store, I feel like. So, yeah, and like, this is not. Again, I've got no plans right now on the international district store that we can announce right now, but having a third store does make decisions on the smallest store. We can be a little bit more agile about our decisions there, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it.
Sure.
But mostly we are just extremely excited to be moving into the Capitol Hill neighborhood, which, by the way, if you're visiting Seattle, you might end up in that area anyways. It's very close to the convention center. It is on the light rail. And having a big spot in that neighborhood and being able to kind of like build a store from the ground up is really exciting. So I just went and picked out paint today. So we're
nice.
we are on our way right now.
Without doxing myself too hard, that's where I live, is in the Capitol Hill neighborhood.
Oh, awesome.
So
okay.
I'm really stoked to be even more walking distance, because I would usually walk to the IT one all the time and occasionally to the University District one. And the University District one, I guess let me do this. So the one in the International District is about the size of the room that I'm in right now. It's about 1,000 square feet or less.
It is less than 400 square feet in there. It is a very small shop.
Yeah. Whereas your University District one is huge. I mean, it's a pretty decently sized store, and you have a lot of stuff to look at. So yeah.
Yeah. And this location will be, I mean, it's not quite as big as the U District location, but it'll definitely feel more like that one with lots of room to walk around. We have very good storage at this one, which will make, this is the not fun, like the not sexy part of business ownership, but just kind of keeping everything in stock and the sort of ebb and flow of products is something you're kind of always fighting against. So the more space you have to kind of stockpile things, the easier that gets. So I'm very excited about that.
Yay, hoarding.
Yeah.
One thing to mention too is that Pink Gorilla doesn't do any online sales. You do have stuff on the web store where you can buy like t-shirts and cute plushies. Of course, I didn't have it with me. It's right behind me. I don't want to go get it, but cute little Pink Gorilla plushies. One other thing that you guys sell that I thought was really interesting, I didn't really know about, is the Bootleg Buddy kit. Can you explain what that is? Also, I didn't know that Game Boy games had batteries in them and they go bad, and the reason that most of them die is because of the battery and not because it decided to go corrupt. I didn't know that at all, and so until I started buying from you.
Yeah. So the Bootleg Buddy is something I'm very proud of. It's my product, and it was something that I just I guess probably starting around 2015, 2016 started to really see a need for. It's not so much that there were a lot of people like purposefully, being deceitful about what they were selling, but it's just that it became very cheap to manufacture bootlegs of games in other countries, and so they just that just kind of started trickling onto eBay and into stores. I have seen bootlegs on the shelves of GameStop. I mean, it's something that I think most people don't even know to look for, and something that I felt really passionate about kind of educating people about, because there's business reasons for this, but there's also ethics reasons and just like for yourself kind of personal reasons. When you buy let's take a Pokemon game, like a lot of the Pokemon games, especially on like the Game Boy Advance, are worth, can be worth upwards of $50-$60. They are fairly expensive games, just because demand is so high. And when you're spending $50-$60 on a game, you don't want to buy something that is actually only worth $3 because it is a bootleg that was manufactured, and sold on eBay or whatever, just from someone who doesn't really care what you're getting. So even if you're only paying $15 for it, you're by all means welcome to do that. They'll function, pretty much the same. But you definitely don't want to be spending more than a couple of dollars on a bootleg. Well, they're not legal to sell, yada yada yada. But so we will never sell them no matter what the price is. But even if you just like you're like, I don't care if it's a bootleg, you should at least know that that's what you're buying. So the Bootleg Buddy is essentially a kit. I wish I had one on me so I could show, but it is a kit that comes in.
We can take a break if you want to
go. Oh, I don't even know where one is.
Damn,
in this room, okay. Honestly, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
I wish I had prepared.
I was gonna say I can go grab my little pink gorilla plushie while you're looking for your Bootleg Buddy kit, but it's all good.
But it's a set of 4 screwdrivers in a nice little zipper case with a little like wrist strap on it. And the screwdrivers can help you open just about any type of game cartridge. That's most of what is bootlegged. There are bootlegged like CDs and DVDs, but that's a lot more. That's much more rare, and they are far less convincing for the most part. They tend to look very bootleg. You don't really like need a whole kit for it. And it also comes with a bunch of little cards that they're just educational cards for like what to look for. When you're looking at a game, what kind of things will stand out as authentic or not authentic, and just kind of help you. Oh yeah, there you go. You got it right there. So,
Yep.
So, it's a kit we sell for $20. Comes with these 4 tools, and they're pink, which was very important to me because got to stay on brand.
Yeah, I was going to say brand.
Yeah. And it's really just meant to be like a nice thing that you can carry around with you when you're at flea markets or at conventions or any place that you want to just kind of check and make sure that, you're getting what you're paying for, especially if you are buying something higher end, something that's $50, $60, even like $100 or $200. You really want to open that up and make sure that what you're getting is the real deal and not a $3 bootleg from AliExpress. So they've gone over pretty well. I know a lot of people they've sold very well. I mean, I'm very happy that people have sort of recognized that, yeah, that's a thing that's useful for them. I mean, it's something I care about. I think that it's good for people to know what they're buying and, at least not get screwed over either on accident or on purpose.
Yeah, and I'm super thankful for it. I'm also very lazy, so when I buy from Pinkerella, I know I don't have to do that in the first place because you guys already done it for me. So
yeah,
that's another added bonus. But if you're definitely in the Seattle area, whether it be the International District or the coming soon Capitol Hill or the University District, definitely check out any of the stores and spend your money there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So pivoting away from being a co-owner in your previous job, let's focus on what your full-time job is, which is being the co-director of the Video Game History Foundation. To start out, to set some context, can you explain what the org is and what the mission of the 501(c), right? Yeah,
501(c)(3), yeah.
C3, I always mix those up.
It's a charity. That's the important part. Yeah, so we're a nonprofit that is focused on game history, preservation, education, and celebration. That's kind of the official mission statement. What that means in practical terms, we believe that there's a real lack of good video game history content out there. Like if you go to a Barnes and Noble or a bookstore right now, and you look at their music section or their movies section or any other kind of media, you will see walls and walls of books about biographies of musicians or the making of this album or that sort of thing. If you go to the game section, it's a much smaller shelf. It is 99% guidebooks and art books, and there's maybe 3 books on actual, like, video game history or content or a biography or anything like that. That's just books, but the point kind of stands that there's really just there's not a lot of good historical work out there, readily available, I should say. And we fully believe that this is in huge part to do with the accessibility of like learning about video games. So if you want to learn about how a game was made, for the most part, you have very, very little access to anything that'll help you figure that out. Developers are very, very closed off. I mean, this is changing a little bit now, and there are some exceptions to this, obviously. But like Double Fine being a really good example of, a company that is very kind of open book with what they're doing. But for the most part, and especially throughout history, a lot of these companies were very, cards close to the chest, or they just, they're not really exposing anything. And they certainly aren't cool with, if the source code for a game even has been retained somehow with people poking through it, and lots of legal reasons and stuff for that. But the point is, if you want to learn about how a game was made, or like how it was marketed, or the people that worked on it, there's really just kind of nowhere to go. Traditional libraries don't collect this stuff, and so that's what we're doing, is we're collecting this stuff, and we're working on making it extremely accessible to people. We are in the middle of working on like what the dream thing has been all along, which is basically just a big online portal for accessing all of our archives. This stuff is expensive to build, believe it or not. And, and libraries have a lot of protections for copyright and, research and that sort of thing. But, there's hurdles and stuff there too. But I mean, the basic gist of what we do is we're trying to get resources into the hands of people for studying these things. So we are, finding developers who used to work in the game industry. We're basically just being like, what do you still have left? Are you willing to let us, digitize it, let people access it? We have had a good amount of success doing that with developers specifically based in Chicago, because that's where there are basements and large houses and that sort of thing. So people hold on to things a lot more so than they do if they worked on games in, say, the Bay Area or in Seattle. But we want to expose this stuff to people so that they can learn about it and hopefully make really good content about it. So we are collecting eventually every magazine that covered video games. Right now it's just a US English language is the vast majority of our collection, but we have a bunch of Japanese stuff, a bunch of European stuff. We have sent over 1,100, we've scanned over 1,100 magazines that are now available on Retro Mags and on the Internet Archive and that sort of thing. So it's really just about getting this sort of information that's not otherwise easily accessible to people into their hands. And yeah, it's everything from, how games were marketed and played, and things like the magazines, but also things that were sent to the magazines, things like a press kit. A company might send a magazine like a big binder full of stuff that's like, here's what you should say about Gex on on the 3DO or whatever. And the magazine might be like, okay, yeah, we'll say this, and we'll say this, and we'll use that art. And, but what about all of the other stuff they sent in that binder? Like, what else was it important for? Did the company think it was important for you to know about Gex? A historian might be interested in that. So all of that, and then all of the development side of stuff. So, that's obviously things like going down to things like concept art and original sketches, actual code. It's even like photos of the development team or, internal correspondence. You might have like a letter from one guy to another that's like, you really should change this because, Nintendo's not going to allow us to have a cross in our game or whatever. And, it's contextual things like that that kind of help you learn more about how a game came together. Obviously, in a perfect world, any historian could just interview any person that worked on a game, but while that's still mostly possible right now in 2022, they are starting to get old, so that will not always be possible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's very, very long-winded. We do some other stuff too. We do like a pop-up museum at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo every year. We provide art assets to companies who have lost them, because companies lose their own art all the time. And that we find someone who worked for them 15 years ago and we digitize it from their collection. And then later on, they're like, hey, do you have the cover art for this game? It's like, yeah, we do actually. Here you go. So, yeah, I'm sure I'm missing some stuff, but lots and lots of ways of preserving video game history, all in the name of making it more accessible to people and making sure it's safe.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's very few there are other organizations that are doing that. Specifically like the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, and also the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. And kind of touching on what you mentioned before in terms of like press kits and like the amount of research that you have to do. I was listening to a previous interview that you had done where you had more or less pieced together all of the anecdotes and facts about it was like a stationary bike for the Super Famicom. Was that it?
Yeah, for the Super Nintendo.
Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that is a very good illustration of the kind of thing that we're trying to make easier. So when I was that video's on my YouTube channel, and I did a ton of research, just kind of like, this newspaper might have said, 2 sentences about it. This newspaper said 2 different sentences about it. This magazine said something different. And all in all, when, all of that research kind of combined, I ended up getting just about every, fact that was sent out to the media that you could print. And then later on, when we were at Game Informer magazine, kind of helping them go through, long story, but Game Informer, they've been around since '92, and they had a room where they were just kind of throwing everything they were sent as the press, which is incredible. There will never be anything like that ever again. And so we were, helping them go through that and digitizing it for 5 weeks, and did not get through all of it. But in doing that, we found the actual press kit from Life Fitness that they had sent out to the magazines. And it was just, it's just a simple like 2-page fact sheet. And yeah, I'm like, if I had just had this, not to say I wouldn't have like read all of the newspaper articles and stuff, but like I wouldn't have had to piece all of that together. I would have just been like, okay, this is everything they wanted you to know about this. And, no one printed the whole 2 pages of it because that would be crazy. But, between like 16 sources, they almost did.
Right. It's like if Eternal Life was like a cake recipe and you would piece together all the ingredients from everything else, and then you finally get the real recipe. You're like, yep. Oh, I could have done this a long time ago.
Yeah, like I figured out the eggs. I did figure out the flour and everything, but man, it would have been so much easier if you had just given me this in the first place.
Or I could just buy the stupid sheet cake from Costco. What are you gonna do? Yeah, so I think, you illustrated it very well. Just kind of talking about like, you're not just cataloging games, it's all the other things around games, the actual creation of games.
Yeah, and in fact, that is something that sets us apart from some of the other institutions you talked about. Is we actually don't collect games at all, mostly because we think other institutions are doing a plenty good job, plus collectors are doing a pretty decent job of it. That if you need to reference a retail game, for the most part, you're going to be able to, both physically and especially digitally, because I think by this point, everybody knows that ROM sites exist. So we don't collect games at all. And, both the Strong and especially NVM are certainly more museum forward, I would say. Like, we're not a museum, we're an archive. The Strong is both. And the National Video Game Museum is a museum, and I believe they have some archival plans, but at least as of right now, just have a museum. But yeah, we don't we don't do anything with games. We are all about just kind of the everything else behind the games, because if you are writing a book about a game or making a documentary or a YouTube video or an article or even just like a school paper or something, we believe, and we can help you out if you can't, but we believe you can probably figure out where to get the game itself and look at that, and the cover art and the cartridge art, and play the game and everything, and that gets you some of the story, but certainly not enough to write a book on. So
makes sense. So you mentioned digitizing documents. What are some of the most challenging and tedious portions of doing what you do are?
Well, I'll start with tedious. I mean, like, de-stapling things is can be a pretty long process. We, at the end of the Game Informer trip, we had like 2 big cups full of staples, which it takes a lot of paper to get, any like visible quantity of staples. Staples are very small. But oh gosh, the challenges go on forever and ever. I mean, I won't even get into things like, what do you do about mobile games? What do you do about, a lot of that stuff is kind of outside of our realm. But, even in dealing with older stuff, which theoretically should be easier because things were sent on paper, or maybe they were sent on, on floppy, which is a volatile media, but it's still like they still make floppy drives. It's not super hard, or CD or DVD or something like that. You also have a lot of things that, have tool dependencies that may no longer be available anywhere. So you may have, we have situations where we have most of the source of a game, kind of all of the things that go into making up a game that would be compiled together to create the actual game, and no build tool. And the build tool is from 1993 and it doesn't exist anymore. And, that sort of thing. So, and also tape backups were a very popular way of backing up hard drives back then, and it is not a standardized thing. There were 5 or 6 different companies selling you different ways to back up your hard drive onto a tape, but require that specific program and maybe that specific version of that specific program to be readable in any sense.
Right.
DAT tapes are a nightmare. I mean, there's all kinds of just media and tool dependency things that can get very, very difficult. Scanning things is not difficult. It can be tedious, I guess, but it's not difficult. But yeah, once you start getting into the digital born things, it can start getting pretty complicated.
So pivoting away from your professional career and into your personal stuff. So one of the things that I really appreciate about what your collection is focused around and what you're passionate about is that you're passionate about handheld games, which not a lot of people are passionate about. And I think it's really awesome that you kind of focused your collection around that specifically, in addition to WonderSwan, which I'm going to ask you about very shortly, and Animal Crossing.
The
nice.
Full WonderSwan set is behind me on that side, but I'll
getting ahead of myself. But let's kind of start with just talking about handhelds first. So I don't feel like handheld consoles and games really get the love that they deserve, because a lot of people focus more on the consoles or PCs, whatever. So given the fact that you're a connoisseur, what are some handheld games and or consoles that people should take the time to play?
Ooh. Well, I'll start with a more obvious one and maybe work backwards. I think everybody in the world should have a DS Lite. It is basically the most, it is a a perfect handheld system as far as I'm concerned. It's just a very sleek, slim, light, works very well, works very reliably. The DS is such an incredible and versatile system. Since you can play both DS and Game Boy Advance games, you get like a very wide range of stuff you can play. Really nice screen. That's probably like the handheld that I'm like, no, literally everyone can find some stuff to enjoy on that, and it's just a very well put together handheld. So as you mentioned, I am really into the Bandai WonderSwan, which is a Japan and Korea only console that I think is, you don't have to have one, but I think everyone should know about it and sort of appreciate it a little bit. It is a system that was sort of originally designed by Gunpei Yokoi, who is the brains behind a lot of things at Nintendo, a lot of their early toys, behind the Game Boy, behind the Game & Watch, a lot of their sort of early big successes there. And he left Nintendo and founded this company called Koto Laboratories. He unfortunately passed away before the WonderSwan ever made it to market. But it is very much like it's a very Nintendo feeling console without being a Nintendo console. Very, very sharp screen there's a couple versions of it. The original one is just a black and white. It's very, very sharp black and white screen. At least in terms of like the contrast and that sort of thing. You get a little bit of ghosting issues on it, but not nearly as bad as the original Game Boy.
Right.
But it in theory can be played both. I always have one of these in reach, both horizontally and vertically. So not every game takes advantage of that, but it's certainly something that kind of sets it apart, and I think encourages some really interesting development on it. The other really cool thing about it that I like, because I mean, again, this is a Japanese system. It was very heavy on the RPGs, so it's not something that everyone if you aren't into puzzle games or it's got some decent platformers, couple of shoot 'em ups on it, couple of fighting games. But if that's not your thing and you don't speak Japanese, you probably don't have a whole heck of a lot of a reason to pick one up. But if you do, then excellent. But what really makes it interesting is that it is kind of the home of a very early homebrew and indie scene. So there was a development kit for it that you could just buy commercially. You didn't have to be a game company and submit for one or anything like that. You could just order one, and you could program your own games. And they held competitions for these games, and the winners of these competitions would get their games put onto a cartridge and sold commercially. So it's a very, very cool system just for sort of, it never really captured a huge share of the market in Japan. It never really took off, but it's a really, really cool vision of what a very open console like that could be. And what the sort of like creativity of the homebrew and indie dev could be before that was, before Steam, like before that was a super easy thing to break into. And there's been a ton of weird uses for it over the years. There is, I found a blog where some people turned it into the computer you'd use in like your skydiving kit. So they've like attached GPS to it and made, I don't actually know what you need to go skydiving, but something about coordinates and air quality and height and I don't know, that sort of elevation, that sort of thing. Right. People have put emulators on it, which is wild because it's not a very powerful system. People have, turned it into all manner of just kind of like weird other computing uses. I mean, commercially, they sold a fishing sonar for it. They sold a pregnancy tracker for it. They sold a little like robot bug that you'd control with your WonderSwan. I mean, it's a very versatile little system. So I'm I'm very into it. I think that was probably what you wanted to ask next, and not what
No,
not
it's
what you were
fine.
asking of me. But
I don't need to. I mean, natural conversations just flow. Totally fine. I'm not looking here to interrupt you. You were going for it, so I just let you go for it. So
yeah, I think if all of that sounds cool to you, the modern equivalent is the Playdate, and everyone should pick up a Playdate. Those are really cool. Um, the little yellow system with the crank, it's also extremely open. They have, just anyone can kind of drag and drop, create their own game, and sell it on the marketplace and distribute it and stuff. And it's just a very, simple but very open system like that for an indie / homebrew scene. I collect a lot of really weird handhelds. I don't actually like recommend any of them. Like I've got a full Cougar Boy set. I've got like the Game King, the Game Mate, uh,
you're mentioning some international handhelds at this point.
yeah, yeah, the One Station. I'm just looking up now, trying to see what all I have. I have a lot of just very strange, Gizmondo, Zodiac. Like I don't actually recommend any of these. They're just kind of neat, and I think that you know, especially in the age before we all had smartphones, or before smartphones were really a thing, handhelds were uh, not all of them were obviously trying to be what a smartphone is now, but I think all of them sort of had there was some dream of that, some spark of that was alive in handhelds before that. I mean, we've always wanted a cool computer in our pockets, and even the Game Boy had things like an English to Spanish dictionary in it, or a travel guide, or something like that. Like these were all cartridges you could get for your Game Boy and play. So
Yeah, I was just going to say, with you switching the orientation of the WonderSwan, going from horizontal to landscape, like that's absolutely, like, especially in the early days of mobile development, that's something you had to wrestle with. It was like, okay, if you're horizontal, you're more of a serious game, whereas if you're landscape, you're more casual, because
right,
you got to think about the usability of play, where like if I have my phone, I can play it on the bus one-handed,
right.
standing up, while my other hand is holding on the rail, so it makes it a more casual game. Whereas if it's horizontal, I need both hands, or if I'm disabled, maybe I only have one hand. So it's all about accessibility, and like how, where are people going to play your game, and how are they going to interact with it is super important. So the fact that they had the forethought to give a console like the WonderSwan accessibility options of like, I can play this in landscape or horizontal, like that's wild. So
Yeah. And I mean, to be clear, not a ton of games really take advantage of that, but the ones that do are very cool. So
for sure. So kind of building on that, like with the release of the Nintendo Switch in 2017 and Valve creating the Steam Deck, the separation between a powerful PC or home console versus like a nerfed handheld device. I mean, I grew up playing like the Tiger Electronics like version of like Virtua Fighter and stuff like that, which was
yeah,
god awful. And I had a Game and Watch when I was a kid too. I actually love Game and Watch, but calling that anything close to a Nintendo game is laughable. But the delta between a console and handheld device continues to shrink, to where now with the Switch and the Steam Deck and with the Vita before that, and even with the PSP a little bit, you have more serious mobile games or handheld games in general. Where do you see the handheld game and or market heading, given the fact that we're kind of at this like watershed moment of it's pretty serious already?
yeah. I mean, I think this was always kind of like the dream of the handheld gamer, was that it would just be the same games you're playing on console, but in your hands. So I mean, I think that's the gap on that continues to close, and probably basically will close. But what we're seeing kind of parallel to that is things like the Playdate, where there is still, not a huge demand, but there is still a demand for these kind of like bespoke, you know, interesting experiences that can only happen on a handheld. And I think that's right now that's mostly just filled by the Playdate. Um, but I would not be surprised if that just kind of becomes, a new kind of trajectory for handheld gaming, is that we get a little bit of this smaller bespoke market for interesting experiences like that.
So as a collector and as a retailer and as a historian, what games are you chasing after right now?
Ooh, well, as I alluded to earlier, I have completed my WonderSwan set, so I have every WonderSwan game ever made. Which means I'm not chasing a whole heck of a lot right now. There's a couple like box variants I could go after if I really wanted to, which, I'll get to at some point. But man, I don't add to my collection very often these days, to be honest. It's whenever something excites me or inspires me. So I think a lot of the more recent stuff is some of those stranger handhelds that I have. I got some of those earlier this year. Occasionally pick up a cool looking import or two, but people assume, I think, a lot that I take all the good stuff from my store, and I really almost never take anything out of my own store. I'm lucky enough that I started collecting, in the early 2010s, and I've amassed a pretty good collection, and everything's pretty expensive now, and I'm pretty good.
Nice. And as a retailer, I guess, what are things what are some games that you're constantly chasing after? And also a historian, like what are some things that are kind of like white whales for you in terms of the things that you're chasing after?
So in the stores, I mean, it's always just the popular stuff. It's the Pokemons, the Marios, the Zeldas. Like that's always the most popular stuff that sells the best, and that we pay the highest percentage on for the most part. I mean, it's a constant struggle to keep kind of the classics in. And for the foundation, I mean, it's really, I don't know that there's one thing that would change my life, because it's always very dependent on just kind of who we're talking to. I mean, we have some developers we're working with to digitize their life's work, and within that I always find something really, really exciting. Maybe not exciting to everybody, but like design documents over the years for a game, and being able to see how it changed and that sort of thing. If I had to name an actual white whale, I mean, one of my favorite games of all time is the original Animal Crossing, and it has a very, very interesting development history. I would love to see more development talk and documentation from that, but I am not exactly super confident that Nintendo's ever gonna share any of that stuff. So that is truly a white whale.
Yeah, I was going to say Nintendo has always been kind of a black box about that kind of stuff, but that's actually related to my last question for you, and it's very serious. Are you ready? So you've mentioned before, I'm assuming that your favorite Animal Crossing villager is the same. Is it Midge?
It is, yeah. Wow,
Okay.
when did I say that?
Don't worry about it. I do my research too.
Cool.
So given the fact that that's your favorite all-time Animal Crossing villager, who is the worst Animal Crossing villager of all time?
So I'm very strongly, especially after New Horizons came out, I'm very strongly anti, like, people hating on villagers aesthetically, because it's always been like this. I mean, I've been a part of the Animal Crossing community for forever. Was a moderator on an old Animal Crossing forum forever ago when I was like 11 years old. But yeah, there's, oh gosh. What is my least favorite Animal Crossing character? It's probably one of the like special characters that I just think is kind of useless, and I'm trying to think who that would be, because like all the villagers are just doing their best as far as I'm concerned. They're all like, you might think one of them's ugly or whatever. Oh, you know what? Okay, I will go with a villager. I don't even know if he's still in the games anymore, but there was a frog named Wart Jr., which is such an unfortunate name and unfortunate look. And he was just a pimply brown frog, and it's not his fault, but it's a very, very unfortunate looking villager. Oh, I wish I had a better answer for that. I'm like looking over at my Animal Crossing collection for clues or something. Captain's a little creepy. Might go with that.
Hippo is my least favorite.
Yeah, Yeah,
I got
that's
I
fair.
got I got stuck with him. I had to do everything possible to try to kick him off my island, but they always suggest everybody but him to get kicked
Yep.
off. So
It knows somehow. It knows.
yeah, good times. All right, Kelsey. Thank you so much. Your time has been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you for sharing so much about your personal and professional career.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we take off, is there anything that you'd like to plug? Social media sites, cool things happening in your life? The floor is
Sure.
yours.
Yeah, if you want to follow my podcast with the Video Game History Foundation, it is called the Video Game History Hour. It's on, all the places you get your podcasts. Check out the Video Game History Foundation, gamehistory.org, see if it's something that speaks to you. And yeah, if you're in the Seattle area, please come check out Pink Gorilla Games. We've got, we're about to have 3 locations, and all 3 are going to be very, very accessible to any place you'd be staying if you are visiting Seattle, because they're all in Seattle proper. They're all very close to major transit lines. So
yeah, I was going to say you're north, south, and east now. So it's going to be very exciting. Well, actually, north, south, and central, kind of.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. All right, Kelsey, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.